A very good afternoon to you. And to those of you who are watching this as a recording, I say welcome. This is the first in a series of lessons, I suppose you'd call them, on the answering of contextual questions. Specifically, this is aimed at, as you can see on the screen, at the English Home Language Grade 12 types, but it will be useful for everybody all the way up from grade 10 up to grade 12, and possibly grade 8 and 9 will benefit from this as well. So I would encourage anybody, if you're thinking that this is not for you, you'd probably be wrong. Let's get straight into this then. Now, the number one thing about the questions, especially home language ones, is understanding exactly what the instruction words mean. You know, other people call this the question words. I call them instruction words. Let each man be convinced in his own mind. Now, one of the most common ones is, of course, comment on. So, what does that actually mean? And this is what the dictionary definition has given me. I sifted through a number of definitions, by the way, but this was possibly the simplest, and I go with simplicity rather than complexity. So there you can see, when you are asked to comment on something, well, I'm not going to read it off the screen, because if you're watching this, you're definitely not blind, but there is the meaning of to comment on. And here we have, of course, a very common one. Now, when you are doing a comparison, as you can probably see by the screen, and I'm deliberately not looking at my own notes this time, when you are comparing, you are looking at similarities and differences. And make sure that you have covered both aspects of that when you are doing a comparison. Otherwise, it's not a complete comparison. I'm not saying there will always be similarities and differences, but if there are, that is what the examiner is trying to extract from your knowledge. Okay, and here is one of the most common words: discuss. When you are asked to discuss something, then there should be discussion involved. And what is discussion? Okay, it's reasoning, it's logic, it's argument. It's where you can say, because x plus y equals 3 and y is equal to 1, then x must be 2. It's logical. Okay? So this one, you require a good few lines in order to discuss something. I must say, again, while we're commenting on this, I don't like myself setting any question which asks for discussion for less than 3 marks. Because in order to discuss something, it takes pretty much a short paragraph. So bear that in mind. If you are asked for a discussion, make sure that there's bulk, that there's good meat and potatoes to the whole argument. Oh, I love food metaphors. Evaluate. Now, this one, of course, is very much a two-part possibility. When you are doing an evaluation of, for example, a residential property, what you are interested in is the cash value. However, this is very seldom what you are being asked about in an exam. In an exam, you'll be more likely to be asked when you are asked for to evaluate, you are going for significance. It's rare that you will actually be able to put a worth or a cash value on something in an exam when you are, for example, being asked to evaluate the significance. I'll go to Macbeth, it's one of my favorites. Evaluate the significance of the fact that Fleance escaped when they murdered Banquo. It's very significant indeed. And Shakespeare, of course, was very clever. He knew how significant it was, because Banquo would eventually become the ancestor of King James I of England, who was also James VI of Scotland. And it was during his reign that we had the Gunpowder Plot and the And Macbeth was then written in order to ensure that the king could rely on the loyalty of Shakespeare and his crew. Okay, let's move on. And there are some even worse ones that we are about to encounter. Whoops, let's just go back one. Speculate on. Now this one is not common, but I have seen it given in papers. It's just a fancy way of saying, you know, what do you think is, or suggest a reason for. And there you can see the definition. So again, I'm not going to read it to you. But when you encounter this, remember, it's not difficult. It's just somebody with a nasty sense of humor giving you a difficult sounding instruction. Don't panic about it. It doesn't really matter. Okay, it's just what do you think is. All right. Now, account for. This one is very common, and I quite like it. It's not a very difficult one to answer. All it means is, you know, say why this is happening, or why that happened, or why this person is now in trouble, or something like that. When you account for something, then you must stand up and give reasons. It's as easy as that. Predict. Now this one you're not going to encounter very often, for the simple reason most texts are not, or the texts in exams are not narrative. They are more academic texts, you know, like discursive or argumentative or expository. So in those cases, there's nothing to predict. Usually, I mean, okay, you could get some really witty examiner who would say something like, if you're talking about, let's say, construction of dams or something like that, and they'd say, you know, predict whether this dam would be prone to failure or something like that. It's possible, but it is quite rare actually. The main reason I've included it is that in one paper we did have this, and very few people actually worked out specifically what was expected of them. So it's included as a sort of a safety catch, just in case you need it. And now comes the granddaddy of them all. When the word critically is chucked in, oh dear. And of course, this is a very common instruction. Critically discuss is the most common introduction to a 4-mark question at home language level. And the reason it's so tricky is that you're doing two things at once, and you must understand the full meaning of both words. For those of you, who, by the way, who are pausing and making notes, I commend you, because those notes are going to stand you in good stead. You know, obviously everybody's thinking, comprehension tests, comprehension tests. Yes, yes. But these things come up in the paper 2 as well. In the literature paper, which we are going to look at a bit, sorry, my apologies, at which we are going to look a bit later if time permits. I've certainly got the stuff prepared for it. But when it says critically discuss, you must know exactly what is meant by that phrasal instruction. It's no longer just a word. Now we're talking about a phrase because you've got more than one word together. So obviously one is going to alter the meaning of the other. Critically, of course, is an adverb, not an adjective. So it cannot describe, it can only qualify or modify. There we are. Don't say you don't get lots of lovely tips and advice, mahala, on this program. Let's move on. Now, analyzing the questions. And if I were to say what is the most important part of this whole broadcast, this is it. Okay, instruction words are very important, make no mistake. But that analysis of the question, I have marked in my career many thousands of question papers. And one of the biggest frustrations that I have, especially when it comes to marking comprehension tests, and of course paper 2, let's say both, I can get that sense that the person has definitely read and understood the text, which is a good thing because comprehension is all about understanding. It's not just about copying and pasting. And then they go and foul it up completely by not reading the question carefully. I'm preaching to you a little bit here, but this is a good thing about which to preach. Make sure that you understand what the question is asking. Do not be in a hurry. Do not rush through your papers. You know these signs stuck up all over the N1. Don't fool yourself. Speed kills. It applies equally to exams as it does to cars. Both of them can lead to awful consequences if you're really overdoing the speed at which you're working. Speed is not critical. There is, in a paper 1, there is enough time to do it. In a paper 2, there's, well, usually enough time to do it. I must admit paper 2s can get very stressful, and I acknowledge that. But it's no good answering something in a hurry if you're condemning yourself probably to a zero mark for your response. So let's take a look at this now. Okay, this is number 1. Instructions that limit the scope of your answer. Now, I have deliberately chosen the example of a paper 2 question where it says, well, there you can see, it's asking you to refer to a specific line in the extract. But equally, you get in the paper 1, it will ask you to refer to a specific paragraph. Or it could say, in your own words, because that limits the scope of your answer. Automatically, you're not allowed to quote or even lift a part of an extract from a text. Okay, so be careful about that one. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2 is the instruction words. Now, we've just looked at the instruction words. They really, really matter. Those instruction words are going to tell you, well, it says it there, the type of answer that is required. And the reason I'm saying this aloud is even if it hadn't said it there, I would have said it again anyway. And so there, that is how important it is. And then, of course, once you've limited your scope and once you've analyzed your instruction word, then basically you go down to the rest of the question, all the other words involved in the question. And we call them the content words. I suppose there are other names for that, but specific content required in the answer. Okay, now, again, for those of you who are being cunning and are taking down notes, this is the time to do it. If somebody is running a projector at this point, please pause, otherwise I'm going to move on and we'll look at the common sense bits. Now, one thing that I haven't put on here, by the way, is read the instructions. I'll say that again, it sounds so good. Read the instructions. This is not specifically part of what we're tackling today, but for you grade 12 home language types, remember back to the test that you wrote in the first term, where the summary gave a negative instruction. It didn't say summarize the text. It said use the text to work out what mistakes to avoid. Now, I know for a fact, because many of the teachers have told me this, that this was a major stumbling block. People did not read the instruction. And usually, I know the instructions are the same for every exam, but they're not always the same. And if you get a strange examiner who sets negative style summarizing, oh boy, if you don't read the instructions, you're dead. You're throwing away marks. So remember that one. Read the instructions. Good. Now, the first one, obviously, is mark allocation. If you've got a 3-mark question, there must be, and I'm going to use the same images previously, there must be enough meat and potatoes in that response of yours to make it worth 3 marks. You can't just write 1 or 2 or 3 words down and hope for the best. That's not the way it works. And I mean, just because you've written down the word, let's take car in the answer, C-A-R. I know it's a 3-letter word, but that doesn't mean you're going to get 3 marks for it. all right? If it's going for 3 marks, you must go for reasoning and logic and providing examples from the text and the whole gamut. It's got to be included in there. And if you're going up to 4-mark questions, which is normally the last of the comprehension test questions, will be for 4 marks. And it's also the last of the questions always in the drama or the novel section of paper 2. It always ends off with a 4-mark question. You're going to need to go into depth. 4-mark questions require comparisons, and they require reasoning and logic and deep discussion and proper deep logical thinking. So remember, you want the marks, earn them, but check first exactly how much is required of you. In a normal home language paper 1, usually you will not encounter any 1-mark questions in the comprehension section. There have been many exceptions to this, but don't count on that. Usually, 90% of the time, you're not going to see any 1-mark questions. So be careful, make sure that you have written down enough to earn your 2 marks. Quoting. Okay. This is a very, very common error, is to foul up the quote. And it tells us automatically that there is a lack of understanding. If you're asked for a quote, and the quote specifically says 8 consecutive words from the text, then you must quote 8 consecutive words from the text, not 7, not 9, and not a full sentence. Because that's automatically wrong. A quote is only correct if it's as specified in the instructions. Okay? Sometimes you'll be asked for a sentence, clause, phrase, whatever. And the other major one is, of course, a single word. Oh boy, I don't know how many times I've seen the question which says, quote a word from the text which proves that X, Y, and Z. All right? And what happens? The whole sentence gets written down. What's the point? If you don't know, well, too bad. Definitely writing down a whole sentence will not get you any marks at all. It merely wastes a little bit of extra of your time, but that's what you want to do, that's what you do, but you're not going to get a mark for it. If it says 1 word is it. Quotation marks when quoting. Now, I want to stress this. We do not deduct marks if you have omitted the quotation marks. You're still going to get the full mark if the answer is correct. But remember that we are humans when we are marking. And it gives us such a good indication of clarity if we can see, okay, this is in quotation marks. It's definitely a quote. Let's see if this quote is correct. It may not be correct. But at least the marker is certain of what is being marked. The other question that I'm asked is, do I use single quotation marks, in other words, just a, or do I use double quotation marks, which is, well, the answer is when you are writing by hand, I strongly recommend double quotation marks for the simple reason they stand out more clearly than the single ones. So please bear that in mind. That is what you should be doing. Okay, let's move on slightly. Now, this is a common error that because we always have to select texts which are universal, they can't be specific to an age category, they can't be specific to a race group, they can't be specific to, shall we say, technical guys or academic guys. We've got to be very neutral. We've got to always select something with which everybody, or to which everybody can relate. So, the unfortunate side effect of this is that the chances are you are going to have some pre-existing knowledge on the content of the topic. It's rare that you will not. So, be careful. If, for example, they ask you, like explain why this cell phone is the most advanced on the market at the moment. You can't then say, no, it isn't. Mine's much more advanced than that. That's not going to get you any marks. You have to refer to the text. And I can't name how many cases, in summaries as well, by the way, this happens in summarizing, of people who have thrown away marks because they didn't simply stick to referring to the text. Right. And this one's obvious. One of the reasons why we tell people not to copy from the text is because we know if you are unable to put it in your own words, your understanding of the text is probably weak. And we know automatically that this is not going to be a top scoring set of answers. So please avoid copying directly from the text if you can. I know very well that some of the people studying at home language level are not in fact home language English speakers, and they do struggle not with the spoken aspects of the language, but many people struggle with the written aspects, possibly because English, when it is written down, is totally insane and has more exceptions to the rules than adherence to them. Numbering. I beg of you, number answers correctly, particularly in paper 2. Oh, well, I suppose paper 1 and paper 2, I mean, they've all got complex numbering systems. But remember, if you've written down the correct answer, but alongside the wrong number, your answer is wrong because you have answered the wrong question. So it will certainly not be awarded any marks. So please, please, please make sure that you are dead certain that your numbering is correct. I know the numbering system in the papers 1 and 2 is complex and annoyingly so, but make sure that you stick to it. And here's an old bugbear of mine. This is not strictly, contextual question technique, but it matters. Line open between answers. And why am I shouting this at you now? Is because it makes the work easier to mark. There's nothing more horrible than sitting marking papers late at night. You're under restricted light conditions. You can hardly see what's being written on the page because many people do have bad handwriting. And you can't see where one answer starts and the next one has stopped. And it's all just squished up together. Please leave lines open for my sake, for the sake of your teachers, and for the sake of your marks at the end of the year, because if you don't leave a line open, it's going to seriously disadvantage you because it will be difficult under normal circumstances to pick out where exactly your answers are. Now, we're going to take a break. Just a reminder, this is the first in our series of answering contextual questions, and it's aimed at the English home language grade 12s, but is useful to many other people as well. When we get back, obviously, we're going to then start with part 2 of this, and I hope that you will continue to watch or to join us then. See you shortly. Good afternoon again. We are now dealing with the second part of our series in which we are looking at answering contextual questions. Here specifically, we are now going to look at the questions that you can anticipate in a comprehension test, and I have included quite a few other questions which you are likely to find in a home language paper 1. And a reminder quickly that this is being aimed at home language grade 12 students, but any of you also, whether you're in 10 or 11, or even if you're in first additional language, you're going to benefit from this because it'll guide you on the answering of questions, which is why you're watching this in the first place. Let's go straight into this. Now, before we look at the questions themselves, we have to look at some background information here. And the background information in this case is the taxonomy, the levels of difficulty in this context. And here we are looking at Barrett's taxonomy, where you have 5 specified levels. Now, your lower order level contains obviously the lowest two. And you've got level 1, which is absolutely literal. You'd ask something like, in what year did the incident take place about which you are reading? And then you'd say something like 1946, and it's either right or it's wrong, and that's it. You find the answer directly in the text. It's the lowest of the lower orders. Or they can also say something like list, by the way. When you see the instruction to list, it's technically a level 1 question, but it's not always easy. Sometimes you've got to search through that text and pick out the various aspects that you're supposed to put down. So in theory, it's easy, but in practice, watch out. Certain examiners are very creative to make sure that you are understanding what you have read. Okay, then reorganization is when you basically lift the information and then restructure it again. But we're going to look at that in a bit more detail now. Then you've got your middle order questions. Now this basically involves interaction with the text. Okay, and here we refer to it as inference, when you have to deduce logically something. And then of course your higher order, you have evaluation. How would you rate this text as a literature piece? Or did you find it entertaining? And if so, why? And do you think it's been well written? And do you think that paragraph number 7 is effective? Or do you think that the title of the text is effective? These are all evaluation questions. And then, of course, appreciation. And that is why we have literature. Once you start to appreciate it, then you know you're a home language English speaker. I'm a poetry fanatic. I absolutely love good poetry. And on the flip side, I absolutely hate bad and pretentious poetry. And there's far too much of it about these days, but I won't go into that too much now. And you've got to ask me, why do I appreciate good poetry? Is because it speaks to me. It entertains me. I mean, we're going to look at, if we get time, I'm going slightly off topic, but bear with me. Jeremy Cronin. He writes with amazing insight and depth. So I enjoy his poetry, especially, what's that one? To speak with the voices of the land, to learn to speak with the voices of the land. It's utterly brilliant. But I always then get so enraged that it doesn't rhyme and scan. I love poetry that rhymes and scans. Okay, obviously the message of the poetry is above all, but disciplined poetry with proper scan and proper rhyme and that sound, that beautiful sound of the poetry in your ears. I mean, poetry is about sound. It's not about writing. And this is why Cronin both delights me and frustrates me, because he's never learned how to use proper formal structure. And that's under appreciation. This is why I appreciate it and why I don't appreciate it. It's both sides of the story in this particular case. Now, let's take a look at this in some detail. There you've got written on the screen basically what can be expected of you. And I've got some words here to define. There's my very favorite. As soon as I see list, I know that my candidates have at least got a good chance of getting the 2 or 3 marks, because that's the easiest of the lower order questions as far as I'm concerned. But as I said, it's not always easy. Right, relate, show, locate, distinguish, example, repeat, label, recall, memorize, etc., 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 read. There we go. That's more or less what you can expect. The why, what, when, where, all the very obvious stuff. Okay, we're not going to look at that in much detail now. Let's rather go to reorganization. Okay, and this immediately it's still fairly basic, but don't regard it as easy. It's quite ironic sometimes that the level 4 and 5 questions are better answered by certain people than the level 1 and 2 questions and the level 3 questions, because level 4 and 5 requires own input, and everybody's got something to say about something. Whereas these, you've got to stick strictly to the text. You're not allowed to wander away from the text. And they can be quite tricky. But anyway, there you see what's going on. Here are the words to define the level. Okay, you noticed that, sorry, just going back one. Discuss is already here. Even from level 2, you can be asked to discuss something. But it's a bit unfair because as far as I'm concerned, discuss shouldn't be in anywhere below level 3, which is at least a higher mark where you can chuck in 3 marks. Okay, there you've got that, and of course reorganize. Right? Let's move on from this. Now here is where it gets fairly complex, the inference level. Okay? And you see there, engagement with the information in the text. So you've got to interact. I call it interacting with the text. And it really matters, this one. Okay, compare. That's one of my favorites. We looked at that earlier when we were looking at the meaning of the words, you know, the similarities and the differences. Contrast, similar to compare, but there you're only looking at differences. Okay, contrast. Why are they different? Okay, examine, self-explanatory. Implement, quite a tricky one, that. I should actually consider adding that to the list of the advanced instruction words. Organize, not too difficult. I mean, that's, you know, in order. Divide, okay. Discuss, there you have it again. Examine, separate, arrange, sift, detect, group, order. Okay, in what order? It's very similar to organize. Okay, so now this is your middle order collection of questions. These are the ones that you can reasonably anticipate, which will indicate that you've got a level 3 question, that is. Now we go to evaluation. Now, do you see this value and worth? For those of you that saw the previous broadcast in this series, you would have seen that to evaluate something is to determine the significance or worth of something. You cannot always reach a fixed cash conclusion. Very often here you're dealing with shades of gray. Okay, so there's a good one. Do you think it's credible? This is something that I search for in essays. I'm sorry, I know I'm going off topic, but just bear with me here. When I'm reading an essay and it's very obviously attempting to be realistic and isn't, it really ruins it for me. Got to share this with you as well. I listened to a certain radio program. It's based in Bloemfontein, the headquarters. I'm not allowed to advertise, so I won't talk about their name or anything like that. But they produce realistic adverts which make my hair stand on end. They are so obviously fake, false. And to me, that is an absolute death sentence for an advert. It shows utter lack of creativity, and really, whoever the copywriter is deserves to be exchanged for another one. But anyway, that's merely my opinion. I'm not going to preach on that now. Okay, words to define the level, and there we've got, I won't read them out aloud, but again, just please note you've got discuss. Discuss is back. So it's at levels 2, 3, and 4, you've got that word discuss. I like this one, imagine. You know, that's a very good one. That comes up under stage directions. Okay, I know we're talking about level comprehension tests at the moment, but under stage directions, you know, if you were the producer of this play, what advice would you give to the actor playing the part of? And there we are. It's an evaluation question. Interesting one, that. Let's move on to appreciation. There we go again. The psychological and aesthetic. Aesthetic. Now, I want to talk about that word aesthetic. Aesthetic is what appeals to your senses. Literature, any form of literature, must appeal to your senses. If you are reading a novel, it must appeal to your eyes and your mind. Always remember that everything's got to be processed through your mind anyway. So it's the mind that matters the most. And the imagination must be stimulated. But books aren't the only form of literature. Say, for example, you are watching a production of a play. There you will then be using your eyes and your ears and maybe various other aspects as well, your feelings. If there's suddenly a roar from the crowd, you're going to feel the rumble of the crowd. But it must appeal to the senses. And this is what literature is all about. Now we have the opposite. There is a word that we use called anesthetic. If you go for an operation, there will be an anesthetist waiting to put anesthetic into you to anesthetize you. And what does anesthetic do? It deprives you of all your senses. You basically go to sleep. Or you go numb so that the sense in question can't be felt, such as if you're at the dentist, you'll get some Novocaine just to numb the sensation in your mouth. But this is the whole point. Anesthetic is numbing the senses. Aesthetic is whatever stimulates and brings pleasure to the senses. Bear that in mind, because if a specific piece of literature does not bring pleasure, then it has little aesthetic value. Watch out for this. I mean, I won't give you examples now, but watch out for literature which is of no aesthetic value, therefore the literature itself is of no value. All literature is written to be appreciated, to have aesthetic value. And if it doesn't have that, the author has failed. Okay, there we are, judge. Judge not lest thou be judged. It says in one scripture and then goes on to say when we should judge. But rate, there we are, validate, predict. There's that word predict again. That, incidentally, in the context of literature is very valid indeed. Because, you've got, let's say, for example, you've reached the end of Macbeth. And you can say quite literally predict what you think is going to happen if the play if the play had gone on for a while, or what you think would have happened if the play had gone on for a while, something like that. That's a very valid sort of question, that one. All right, assess, score, revise, determine, prioritize, evaluate. There it is again. And discuss. Also, so you see, discuss ranges all the way from level 2 up to level 5. It's this almost universal instruction at all the levels. Okay. And there we have the background to how questions are constructed in exams. Now, before we move on to actually looking at the questions, let's take a quick break. I don't want to run this in enormous long chunks. We'll stop just for a minute or two here so you can all catch your breath, go and drink water or whatever it is that you'll be drinking, and maybe use the bathroom if you need to use the bathroom. And we'll be back again within about 2 minutes. So take a break, have a rest. See you shortly. Welcome back. This is the third part in our series on answering contextual questions. And our first example is going to be taken, or our first set of examples are going to be taken from that grade 12 English Home Language March test that was written just slightly earlier this year. I know for many of you it's still fresh in your memories. So let's take a look at these, and here is the first one. Now, no, we don't have to read through the text. The reason why I've chosen this is probably you can still remember the text quite well. It was all about cancel culture and, blotting people out and having campaigns against them, etc., etc. But here we have so many good examples of what we've looked at in the past two presentations. And the first thing, let's analyze this question. Is there an instruction that limits the scope of the answer? And yes, there is. Refer to paragraph 1. Your classic limiting instruction. Okay, so we've got that analyzed already. Now we have to look at our instruction word. And very simply, explain. And what does explain means? Reasons, please. Okay, explain why. Now you must give reasons in this particular case. Okay, and explain why what. Cancel culture is controversial. Okay. And now what's the next thing we have to do? We have to check the score, the mark allocation. It's for 2. So it would seem to me that you're going to have to come up with either 2 points, or you're going to have to come up with a single point and a good explanation. All right? Now, let's take a look at what the memo has to say. Actually, I shouldn't call it a memo. It's a marking guideline. It is not prescriptive, therefore it is not technically a memorandum. But we all still call it a memo. Let's take a look at this. Okay, and I'm sure you can read for yourself, so I'm not going to read it to you. So I'll give you just 5 seconds to go through that. And please note in brackets at the bottom, credit valid alternative responses. I know from my own marking experience, no matter how thoroughly this marking guideline is composed, there's going to be about 9 or 10 alternative types of alternative responses that you eventually encounter, which are correct, fully correct. So that is why such a little modifier is always included. Okay, I'm about to move on. Bear with me. Now, let's take a look at our question here. Are there any items limiting the scope of the answer? And not technically, but obviously, if we've got to refer to line 3, that would give us pretty much a clue that it's not going to be able to be taken from the rest of the paper. Okay, now we look at our instruction word. And what is our instruction word there? State. There's various other words that you can use in place of state. You can also say, explain why the debate remains in limbo. I think the main reason why the examiner didn't use explain is because the previous question already had explain. So a slightly different synonym was simply chosen to say the same thing. All right. So, explain what? The debate remains in limbo. Why is that? Okay. Mark allocation, 2. So again, either 2 points or a single point well explained. Okay, so far, let's take a look at our memo answer. Okay, and there you have it. And again at the bottom, credit valid alternative responses. Now, let me just back away for 30 seconds and allow you to read that in peace. Okay, I'm sure you've read it by now, so I don't have to read it aloud to you. Good. Let's move on. And here, now, be warned, this one is more important than you think. I have frequently seen questions of this nature saying, why only a single line paragraph, or is it effective? It was another very good one that I saw recently. State whether or not you believe that the single line paragraph was effective and substantiate your answer, etc., etc. So many times you will encounter single line paragraphs with questions asked about them. Here is a very good example of that. Okay, now, again, we are going to analyze our question. And what have we got? First, is there a limiting factor to this question? No, except that it must refer to a specific paragraph because it says the single line paragraph, therefore there is only one in the whole text, because otherwise it'd have to say the single line paragraph that forms a paragraph number da 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 da. Okay, so this one, if my memory serves me correctly, was paragraph 3. Okay, so now the next thing we have to look at is the instruction word. And again we have explain. Okay, so we're looking for reasons. Now what are we explaining? The purpose. The purpose of what? The single line paragraph. Now, before we go on to look at mark allocation, why then has the author used a single line paragraph? Obviously, the author used the single line paragraph deliberately. You have to now look into the mind of the author to know why was this done. Okay, and now we look at mark allocation. Only 2 marks. Rats! I'm sure it should have been 3 for something this difficult. No, actually, I'm just playing the fool. It's not that difficult. But really what you're being asked for is insight into the mind of the author. And by my standards, this is more of a level 4 question than it is a level 2. But anyway, let's take a look at it. Okay, 2 marks only. And once again, credit valid alternative responses. Okay, just to show you that there are many options available. This is by no means prescriptive. Okay, there, I'm sure by now you've read that, and let us move on to 1.4. Now here we have come up to discuss. And before we look at that, ask the question again. Is there anything limiting the scope of this question? Now, in this case, I'm going to read it out loud because in my opinion, no, there's no limiting factor. Discuss how and why cancel culture has evolved into its current form. Okay, no, nothing to limit it. There's nothing to say, oh, you can only go to that paragraph or anything like that. Obviously, oh, sorry, there's paragraph 5. My apologies. I'm going absolutely presentation cuckoo. There, I've just minted a phrase. It does say refer to paragraph 5. My apologies for that. There is a limiting factor. I don't know how I missed that. I'm staring straight at the screen in front of me. It's printed in bold on the screen in front of me and I didn't even see it. Hold on a second. Anyone of the production crew, have you got a suitable charger so I can recharge my glasses? They don't seem to be working properly. The camera crews are all laughing at me. They say I'm being absolutely dumb, which I was, and I apologize for that. I really should have seen the limiting factor. It's paragraph 5. Okay. Right, instruction word, discuss. Right, what does that mean? And the answer is to investigate by reason and logic. All right? So we've got to look at this logically. We are investigating it. Reason, logic, so we're going to need items of evidence and we're going to need some sort of sequence because it's an evolution. Okay, it didn't start out this way, obviously. When something evolves, it changes. The original item changes into something different. Now, so we've got discuss. What are we discussing? Be careful, this is now a booby trap. How cancel culture has evolved and why. Okay, a 2-part question there. How and why cancel culture has evolved into its current form. That's complex. Okay? Be careful about this one or questions like this one. Good. Let's take a look at our memo answer. And this one has got 2 addenda at the bottom. Read it for yourself. So, what do you think of that? All right. It's, I think, a very good memo answer here. Originated as people simply cutting all ties, and then it goes on to becoming, evolving into campaigns against people or entities or whatever. And that, I would say, is just about the perfect answer to this. However, there's your indicators at the bottom where it says, 2 ideas well discussed, right, and valid alternative responses. Okay, moving on a bit. Now this one is, to my mind, I should say, a classic level 3, compare. It can be higher as well, but in this case, no, I would say a comparison. Now, before we go on, limiting factors, paragraph 6 and 7. Okay, we've established that now. Instruction word, compare. The rest of it, what are we comparing? We're comparing the opinions of 2 different people. We've got Barack Obama and we've got J.K. Rowling. I've heard of both of them. I'm not too sure who they are though. But they ring something in my memory. Okay, regarding, and what are their opinions of concern to us about cancel culture? Okay. Mark allocation, 3. Good. We've established that. So, without making you strain your brain to come up with the answer, I know that we haven't got the text in front of us. So, what we'll do is we'll go straight on to the memo answer. Okay, now this is very interesting. Let's go through this memo answer because I want to draw your attention to certain aspects. The first thing, when we are comparing, what are we looking for? We're looking for similarities and differences. What is then the similarity that we have to find? Okay, and there it is. They both regard cancel culture as doing more harm than good. Okay, and there you have Obama's opinion. Now we get our differences. Obama says that they're wasting their time. Rowling points out that it makes it impossible to present an alternative point of view because you'll merely be shouted down. Okay, so there we have similarity, difference. And that, to my mind, forms a very good example of the answer that would be required in this instance. Okay, and then of course you've got other correct responses possible. Okay, and we move on. Then, with reference to global warming, oh dear, is this relevant? Sorry, I see an incorrect question has been allowed to slip through the net. I don't know how that happened, my apologies. Okay, so we can't provide this answer for that question. This one obviously was taken from a completely different exam, and I don't know how it sneaked in here. Sorry. So we won't be able to inspect this one. And in fact, I'm so embarrassed, we are going to take a break. This was the 3rd part in our series. We are looking at answering contextual questions. And this is aimed at the grade 12s, the home language grade 12s. When we come back, we shall be continuing with our 4th part, and I hope that you'll be joining us in a few minutes. Goodbye for now. Welcome back. After my monumental mess that I made, please note the alliteration, in the previous broadcast, hopefully now we are going to be witnessing slightly more professional stuff. This is the fourth in our series on answering contextual questions. Now, what I've got in this section here, this is from the 2020 prep exam for home language, the paper 1. And these are the questions on the multimedia text. Now, the multimedia text can be a cartoon, it can be an advert, it can be a graph showing statistics, it can be a diagram, it can be all sorts of things. That's why it's called multimedia. And in this particular case, we've got a rare instance of a 1-mark question asked in the comprehension section. And there you see the example of it. It's a multiple choice question. Okay? And obviously, you haven't seen the cartoon, so you won't be able to provide an answer. So I'm going to do it for you. And the only reason I've included this one is just to give you an example of a multiple choice. There we are. There's your answer. Oh, hint. If you are facing a multiple choice question and you have not the faintest idea what the correct answer is, choose C. It's normally C. Some question papers I've seen, this is so true that every single multiple choice question was answer C. Okay, there were only 3 in the whole paper, but nevertheless, the answer was C every single time. Okay, here is an interesting one. Because it comes up so often, this is one of the reasons why I've included this in this particular session. And what does it say there? First, are there any limiting factors? Yes, frame 6 of the cartoon. And what's our instruction word? Discuss. Investigate by reasoning and logic. Okay, and what are we discussing? Irony. Irony. Okay, and often the same question with minor changes is asked in every exam. Well, not in every exam, but in most exams. There's almost always an irony question. Now, please note the mark allocation. You've got a rather difficult task here being set for only 2 marks. All right? Now, obviously, you won't be able to work out for yourself. So let's take a look at this memo answer, which, again, I think is surprisingly accurate. Okay, there you've read it for yourself. Can we move on? Right. Now, this is, again, a common thing when we come to cartoons. In actual fact, I must warn you, this is in reality a comic strip, but it's the cartoonist who has compiled the comic strip. So, let's take a look. First, is there a limiting factor? Nope, there's not. What is the instruction word? How? That's it. But now it gets very complex indeed. How what? And now we've got a completely new style of question here. How does the cartoonist use diction? Okay, so we've got to look at diction. For what does he use the diction? To portray the female character's attitude. What attitude? Towards people whose viewpoints differ from hers. So we've got here a truly complex set of instructions. And I see once again I have omitted to include the mark allocation. My apologies for that. If my memory serves me correctly, it was 3. And of course, there's your memo answer. And I'll leave you to take a look at that memo answer for about 10 seconds. Totally intolerant of opposition. Okay. moving on then. Now we come to the comparative question. The final question in any home language paper will always be a comparative one. And here we have just that. You've got to compare text A to text B. All right? So limiting factors, there must be a comparison text to text. However, let's take a look at exactly how this is phrased. In your view. Now, stop there. In your view. That's tremendously broad. It's asking for your opinion on something. So as long as you back up your answer with reasoning and logic, you will be credited with full marks. 4-mark question, of course. So, in your view, are the views of the woman in text B relevant to the ideas expressed by the human character in paragraph 6 of text A? Yo! That's complex. Okay? And it says there, justify your response by referring to both text A and text B. Now here, obviously, we are going to look for an amazingly complex memo answer. And this is not the full memo answer. It's going to go on to the next slide as well. Take a look at this. You see this? Yes. And what does it say then? Woman in text B exhibits some of the worst aspects of the human character. Okay. Severs all ties with people, expressing need for... Okay. So we've got that so far, and I'm going to leave you to read it for, let me just say 5 seconds longer before we move on to the next part of the memo answer. Okay, I hope you're happy because I'm moving on now. Okay. There we go to the next part. Frame 2 displays hypocrisy. All right. Self-centeredness, narcissism, actions also too lazy to consider views, cuts people off, etc., etc., etc. Now, what does it say at the bottom there? Candidates have to refer to both texts to obtain full marks. If you don't refer to both texts, sorry, no full marks for you. It's as easy as that. So this is the whole thing. You are comparing one text to another one. Okay. Now, here is something slightly different. This is now moving on to the advertising question. Now here it had, well, as you can see, an anti-corruption advertisement. And it said there, I know, I act, I stop corruption. All right? So let's take a look now at the instructions here. Does it have any limiting factors? No, it merely goes straight into the question. What is our instruction word? Discuss. Okay? Investigate by reasoning and logic. Okay? And what does it say? Discuss the repetition of the first person pronoun in I know, I act, I stop. What is the first person pronoun in this particular instance? It's I like the sound of that. That's why I did it that way. Now, just for interest, here's your memo answer. Because it's personal, the first person pronoun is used to emphasize, well, the whole personal aspect of this. And then you've got I repeated 3 times, etc., etc., etc. Okay. There, I'll leave you to read for just a second or two more. And there, I'm sure you've finished it. Let's move on to our next one. Now, the other thing I want to point out, the advert and the comic strip usually follow the same format. Because they're out of 10 marks and you're not allowed to have 1-mark questions, it's invariably 2 2-mark questions and 2 3-mark questions, because basically there's nothing else that you can, there's no other format in which you can give it. Okay, and usually it's 2-2-3-3. Not always, but usually. And the same applies to the poetry questions when we go across to the literature now. So take a look at that. Repeat it to emphasize the influence. Okay, let's move on. Now this is another classically common question where it talks about the visual aspects, and when you are asking that how does the visual aspect emphasize the message of the advertisement, which is normally written as letters as well. Okay? So in this particular case, by the way, you had a hand reaching out to grab some money, and the shadow behind the hand was that of a venomous snake about to bite the hand that feeds it. Oh, I love that one. There we are. Takes you see it's there. It says it takes the form of a snake. And well, read the memo answer for yourself. I'm sure you'll find it absolutely fascinating. The reason I'm showing you guys these memo answers, by the way, is they give you a very good idea of what to expect for a specific type of question. Not necessarily this question itself, although obviously, well, you're obviously not going to get this identical question again, but you are going to encounter questions very similar to it. Okay, effectiveness of the catch line in the advertisement. Right, now this one, comment on. Right, basically explain, clarify. And there, and provide reasons, etc., etc. Okay, corruption to poison, there we are. Okay, we carry on. Now here again is a comparative question. And there you see it says both text D and text E address the issue of corruption. And here, these lovely, lovely words that are so wonderful when they appear on a paper. In your opinion, which text likely to have greater impact? Okay, and this doesn't just say justify, it says carefully justify, and it's for 3 marks. You see that? Now, I was going to go on to a few more things, such as another advertisement, another comic strip, but we have already done one, and we have already done an advertisement. So, I would like to stop at this point. Okay, just a reminder, this was the 4th in our series on answering contextual questions, which is aimed at English home language, and specifically at the grade 12s, but will be very useful for everybody. When we come back, we're going to switch and we're going to start looking at the questions found in literature. I hope that you will join us for those as well. See you shortly. Goodbye for now. Back. We are dealing here with answering contextual questions. This is the 5th in the series. And now, as you can see from what's on the screen, we've switched over to literature. Now, just a reminder, this is specifically aimed at grade 12 at English home language level, but other people will also benefit from this. Here we have something at which we looked earlier, so I'm going to run through this very quickly just as a reminder. Okay, lower order. Okay, level 1 and level 2, middle order, level 3, higher order, levels 4 and 5. This is just to refresh your memory so we can carry on and look at the literature. Let's start by taking some contextual questions from the 2019 literature paper. So this one is still very much applicable today, and these will be on topics that you have already studied. I hope some of you have already studied these. Now, this one is based on First Day After the War. A reminder that, of course, when you're dealing with poetry, And of course, question 2 is a poetry question. When you're dealing with poetry, you will be given the poem written out in full. I didn't do that this time for the simple reason, as far as I'm concerned, if you don't know the poem already, it won't matter very much to you. What we are looking at here is the type of question rather than the specific questions. Now, the first thing we look at, do we have any limiting factors? Yes, we have line 10. Okay, we can see that quite clearly. And it's referring to a specific word, ululating, right? What is our instruction word? Very simple, it's what. Okay, so we have, what does the word ululating convey about the feelings of the people? Now, already some of you have said, but obviously, if you're ululating, you're celebrating. Nobody ululates at a funeral. It means that, hey, gee, wow, achievement, joy. Okay? So, you know, I'm not very good at it, so I mustn't see if I can produce the sound, because I don't think I will ever. But, there we are. What does that convey about the feelings of the people? And even if you haven't studied the poem, you can know they're happy. Let's take a look at the memo answer. You see that lovely thing, when you change onomatopoeia, the noun, into an adjective, it becomes onomatopoeic. Beautiful word, one of my favorites. Always used to teach it to my kids in class. Onomatopoeia, onomatopoeia, onomatopoeia. Say it like a parrot and you will never forget it again. Okay, then you see the comment at the bottom, award 2 marks for 2 relevant and distinct points. Okay, so we're looking at both the sound, because now we're dealing with poetry, and we're looking at the fact that it's a joyful sound. Moving on. Right? What is the limiting factor here? There isn't one. What is the instruction word? Account for. Well, instruction phrase, if you want to be technically accurate. And for what are we accounting? It's the repetition of we. Now, we is, of course, the first person plural. It can also be an interactive video game. I know I've played we on occasions, but in this case, we're more concerned about the first person plural pronoun, personal pronoun. And why is the we repeated throughout the poem? Well, here it gives a very logical and clear memo answer. Solidarity. We're all in this together. You know, we all stand together. One for all and all for one. And there we are. And there it says also 2 marks for 2 relevant and distinct points. Exactly the same addition as we had the last time. Wait, I'm being too fast. Maybe somebody is trying to look at that and I've just ran away. My apologies for that. A bad habit of mine, trying to run ahead of myself. Okay. We go on to a specific quote. And what is our instruction there? Discuss. Investigate by reasoning and logic. And in this case, I think that's a very good instruction word, because you've got 3 marks that you can achieve in this instance. It's the appropriateness of the image. Now, please note, you're not just looking at discuss the image. You're looking at the appropriateness. What does that mean? That means that how well is the image used in the context of this poem? Does it really fit in this poem? Okay, I mean, for example, an inappropriate image would be hamburgers and stuff, because that would not give you that would give you a sense of being American as opposed to African. And this is a distinctly African poem. So There you have to say, is it appropriate? And here's the memo answer. Okay. Talking about the light, and, well, read it for yourself. I shall not read it to you, but because I hate silence, I shall provide a musical background. By my calculation, that was exactly the amount of the good, the bad, and the ugly that you needed to finish that. Okay, there, you've read it for yourselves. Let's move on. This one, again, very similar to the last one, where it says, refer to line 18, that's the last line of the poem, actually. We saw our ancestors traveling tall on the horizon, which, well, I'm not going to comment yet. But it says here, is this a fitting conclusion for the poem? So you're looking here at appreciation, all right? The full-blown level 5 appreciation. Is this effective? Does this effectively round off the poem, and you justify your response? But now I want to tell you what my response is. I think it's utterly brilliant. You can actually picture this. I can picture it. This group of people, they've got to be far, far away, and they've got to be just between you and the setting sun, so you see them only in dim silhouette. And to me, this has an actual emotional response where you've got, the ones that have come before, and they're looking down and they're saying, we rejoice with you. I often make jokes about my father in that way. When I actually achieve something, and I'll say that I'm long since my parents died many years ago, both of them. But I'd say that they're looking down now and they're smiling, especially when I crack the rotten old jokes that my father used to teach me when I was younger. But this one has a definite response on me. Therefore, I'm giving this one a 5 out of 5. Let's see what the memo answer is. You see that this whole spiritual aspect. Oh, music. What music would be appropriate for this? In case you're wondering, the song's name is For All the Saints Who From Their Labours Rest. Particularly appropriate in this context. Let's move on to another poem. Oh, sorry. Here are some comments on that particular memo answer we just saw. Now, you notice that a cogent, in other words, a logical, acceptable. No response is unlikely, but you may get a response like that. Quite honestly, anybody gives me a no response there, I regard them as utterly mashugana. Really? Such a brilliant, brilliant conclusion to a poem. How can you now say, no, it's rubbish? Anyway, and there we are, 3 marks for 2 ideas well discussed, etc., standard thing there. Now we come to the Garden of Love, and again, sorry if you disagree with me, but I think this poem is brilliant in every single way. It's short, it's sweet, it's powerful, it's to the point, it doesn't overdo it, it just hits you. 12 short lines, nothing particularly complex, and we reach the end. And it's Powerful, powerful, powerful. Okay, let's take a look at this. What does the word sweet convey about the speaker's memories? Be careful. You can't say what does it convey about, the Garden of Love. It's specifically referring to the speaker's memories. You notice how carefully this is worded here. Okay, that one caught out quite a few people, I think. Right, and let's take a look at our memo answer. And there he says, this one says cherished or pleasing to the sentences. And, well, the rest is self-explanatory there and very accurately stated, so I'm not going to try to improve on that. And because it's fairly short, I don't think I'll need to provide you with music in order to read this more clearly. I'm sure you've read it all by yourselves now. Okay, now we have account for. Now, when a conjunction, such as and, is repeated over and over, it's called polysyndeton. Now, you don't have to know that, but if you do know it and you put that in an exam as an answer, oh boy, the examiner is going to think you're really clever. Just a tip for you. Polysyndeton. A good example is, when you come back at the end of the day and it's been raining, and it was raining, and I was cold, and I was wet, and I was tired, and I was hungry, and I didn't really feel like staying awake to eat, and yeah. You see that? And. That's a good use of polysyndeton, and this here is an effective use of polysyndeton, the repetition of a conjunction. Let's take a look at our memo answer. Okay, read it yourselves. Okay, and I think by now you've read it. So let's go on to the more complex questions. Obviously, the 3-mark questions are always more complex. And there we go. Now here you've got line 11, and priests in black gowns were walking their rounds. And this is a killer question. Discuss the effectiveness of the imagery. Wow. You can't just say whether you like the line or not. Please note you are discussing the effectiveness of the imagery. You have to say, is it effective? Well, I think it's absolutely brilliantly effective, but that's my opinion. Let's take a look at what the memo says. How do you like that? Talking about the imagery, the black gowns, the color, this dark church, walking their rounds. So obviously, yeah, threatening, ominous, not nice at all. So it's really, really effective. I would have also included there, I've taken this directly from the official memo, and this is a national paper. But I would have included a comment saying, the imagery is effective because, and then I go on to list the next points there. But this as it is, of course, is an excellent, excellent answer. Just I would have gone for the effectiveness as well. Good. Let's take a look at this now. This is a classic question. And here it asks you, is the title appropriate? And then it says justify your response. Now, here you have something interesting, because this is a question to which there is no right or wrong answer. People are going to have different opinions. So before we look at anything more there, just bear in mind that it's 3-mark question, so it's expecting a complex answer. Let's go straight to our memo answers because they are long. Let's take a look at this. You've got 2 choices Here's the first one. Oh, I should be providing music here. I thought that would amuse you. The title of that one, it's a hymn. It's known as The Church's One Foundation. Very appropriate in this context. Okay, there you've read that. Let's go on to this one now. Because this one, the first one was a yes answer, very accurate. The second one is a no answer, again, very accurate. Both of them are fully correct. They're both backed up with reasoning and logic, etc. Let's see what else I can... Title of hymn, We Love the Place, O God. I'm having fun here. But you see how now you've got contrasting answers, perfectly correct, addressing the question as it's written down. Now, I think we have spoken enough about poetry. Let us therefore take a break. This was the fifth part in our series today on answering contextual questions. This was the poetry section. When we come back, we're going to be looking finally at the questions on the novel. But until then, I hope that you're joining us soon, especially if you are a grade 12 who is studying English at home language level. See you shortly. Welcome back. This is the sixth and final in our series of lessons on answering contextual questions. We are in this case looking at literature, and I've chosen the section on Life of Pi because we're only going to look at this one more section, and I think we'll have covered pretty much everything that we've set out to cover. Life of Pi is, of course, the most popular single literature item. If you're doing Picture of Dorian Gray, my apologies, it wasn't possible to fit in more than one in the time available in this presentation. So we're going to be looking at the questions asked on Life of Pi. This is, of course, taken from the English Home Language Paper 2, the September paper, the prep exam of 2019. So let's take a look at this. Our first question says, well, first, is there a limiting factor? We know the rules. You've got to go for limiting factors. Then we go for instruction word. Then we go for the rest of the question. And then we go for the mark allocation. Okay, so it's always those four aspects we must check. Is there a limiting factor? Yes, we have here, we refer to line 1. Okay. All right. What is our instruction word, or instruction phrase in this case? Account for. What does account for mean? Account for means give reasons for, or explain why something is the way it is. Okay. And now we can look at mark allocation. It's 3 marks. And hey, surprise, surprise, all the other questions except the very last one are also going to be 3 marks. This is how it works in a paper 2, is that in every novel or drama question, it goes 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 4. 7 threes and a 4, and it will amount to a total of 25. So each one of the following questions is going to require, as we put it, some meat and potatoes to bulk it out. Okay, now, what does it say? Account for, so give reasons for, what? Mr. Patel's insistence on what? Why is he so insistent on teaching pi a very important lesson? Now, we all know, if you've read the book, and by now, I'm sure that all of you will have gone past the part where the poor tiger winds up being taken from his friend the zebras and gets fed to, the goat gets fed to the tigers. And it has a nerve-shattering effect on pi. But now, that's not the question. The question is, why did Mr. Patel insist that this was the right thing to do? Well, here's the memo answer. Read it for yourselves. Okay. And, well, I suppose I can include a bit of music in the meantime, just to keep you entertained. It's relevant. Let me see. Now gather round, people, and hearken to me as I tell you a story of a lad on the sea with a huge Bengal tiger in a tiny lifeboat. And the tiger was scary 'cause it once ate a goat. Sorry. Okay. But there we have our memo answer. It's a very good memo answer, so I'm not going to comment any more on that. Let's move on to 9.2, which, hey, surprise, surprise, it's out of 3 marks. Now, here you've got line 13. We set out like prisoners off to their execution. Why does he use this particular synonym? Simile. Sorry, I'm getting tongue-tied here. It's just late in the day. My coffee count is dropping. Explain, right? There's our instruction word, explain. Explain what? This image reveals about Pi and Ravi's feelings at this point. Okay, so they are feeling as if they're being led off to an execution. Now, I'm sure nobody actually enjoys being executed, so perhaps that is the basis of our discussion at this point. But I shall comment no further. Let me rather give you the memo answer. It's a relatively short one, so I won't need to provide you with musical accompaniment in this instance. Okay, I'm honestly convinced that everybody going off for an execution is disappointed about not hanging around any further. Ha, 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 terrible pun. Okay, and there you have it. So, we move on. Now, here we have 9.3, refer to lines 18 to 20. So that's already your limiting thing. This is the father, Mr. Patel, giving Pi and Ravi a lecture on just how dangerous this is. Where he's saying, you don't stick your hand into a tiger cage, you don't get too close to a tiger cage, you just keep a nice safe distance, because this is what happens if you don't. Right, so here, Pi and Ravi by now are in a state of shock. And they've been like, oh no, what have we just seen? And there's blood all over the place because obviously when tigers kill and eat something, it's a messy process. And there's the sound of the crackling bones and the chomping through the intestines. And oh, it must have been horrible, horrible, horrible. And it was all at close range. So, Now, discuss. Discuss what? The extent. In other words, by how much? The extent to which the lesson in this extract, okay, so let's just take that slowly again. Investigate by reasoning and logic the extent to which, by how much, the lesson in this extract, the feeding of the goat to the tiger, contributes to Pi's survival. Okay, there, we've gone through the whole thing now. Now, decide for yourselves. Well, if I were answering this, I would say that it was a tremendously important lesson. Because if Pi hadn't had first-hand experience of what a tiger can do to a person, he might well have spent his last few minutes on Earth in that lifeboat before he became a meal for Richard Parker. But as things worked out, he had the common sense to make sure that he didn't become a meal, and he quickly constructed a raft and got off the lifeboat. But be that as it may, now let's look at the memo answer. Well, we can go to some music that's appropriate. That's the good, the bad, and the ugly, of course. I used that a bit earlier as well. Okay, so there we have it. So in this particular case, the good, the bad, and the ugly, that sums up, the Pi, and you have the hyena, and you have the zebra, and etc., etc., etc. Now, this one is a tremendously deep and complex question, and I want you, please, to take note of this. You need for this question an in-depth knowledge of the final part of the book. For those of you that don't know yet, the book Life of Pi is in 3 sections. You've got the first section, which is basically the background, with Pi being brought up all the way until he is 16 or 17 years of age, and all his experiences that he learns, and the fact that he now becomes a keenly religious person, and the fact that he has all the specialized knowledge of zoology, etc., etc. And that is what effectively what enables him to survive. Then you've got the second section, the big story of him alone on a lifeboat with a Bengal tiger, and keeping them both alive. And then the final section, he's in a hospital, in a clinic in Mexico, and of course the Japanese people pitch up to ask him questions about the sinking of the ship, the Tsimtsum, and he can tell them effectively nothing, but he tells them this very fascinating story about how he stayed alive for, I think it's 8 months, I know it's 227 days. So call it effectively 8 months alone with a Bengal tiger on the Pacific, which is the biggest ocean in the world. Okay, so now you must know the second story, which is it completely contradicts the first. Well, doesn't completely contradict the first one, but it is such a different story as to be not the same at all. Okay, that basically takes all the animals out. The second story, his mother actually makes it into the lifeboat with Pi, although she's very quickly killed by the chef, after the chef has already killed the Japanese sailor, the Chinese sailor, etc., etc. So you need some knowledge of content here. So make sure that if you don't reach the end of the book, make sure that you've at least done a summary of it. Now let's look at the question. Sorry, I'm going a bit off topic. Discuss. Right? Investigate by reasoning and logic. The significance of mother's role in Pi's second version of the story. Okay, she's not in the first story. In the first story, she doesn't make it onto the lifeboat. In the second story, she does. All right? So, what is her significance? Why is it so important to have the mother in the second story, the second version of the story? And once again, I'm not going to try to answer that for you. I'm simply going to refer you now to the memo answer. Okay, and there you can see that this answer is really extremely good indeed. I need something sort of sad and not happy. More Than a Feeling by Boston. A nostalgic song, thinking back to what could have been. Okay, there we go. That's it. But notice this, how the memo answer stresses the significance, the significance, the significance, at the same time pointing out the various incidents that had to occur to make it so significant. A great answer, this one. Oh dear. I'm sorry, I messed up the animation of the previous one. We'll have to go back to it anyway. But my apologies. I should have animated this so I could bring up the answer afterwards. I never approve of throwing all the information on a board at once. Besides that, you first got to be given some time to think about the answer. Now, what's going to happen? You're not going to look at the question. You're all going to go straight to the memo answer. Oh dear, I messed that one up again. My apologies. Right, but if you're looking at the question, account for, okay? Give reasons for, explain. Account for the interview with Pi conducted by the Japanese officials. Now, I actually accidentally blew this one to a certain extent by discussing it in the first place, but it's such an ironic fact. They pitch up there, they spend 2 days with Pi, and when they come away from it, they've still got no idea at all of how the Tsum actually sank. All they have is Pi's descriptions, which are vague, of a loud bang. Nobody knows what caused the bang, why, whatever. All they know is that the ship sank. So after this most frustrating trip down into Mexico to finally get hold of Pi, they come away with nothing except a very good story. But as far as their bosses are concerned, what a waste of time. You know, all that money spent for nothing at all. But anyway, there's the memo answer. And once again, I believe this one to be a very logical and lucid answer. So I'm not going to add anything to it. Let's carry on. Okay, now 9.6, refer to lines 33 to 34, where the Japanese guys say to Pi, we're going to be very careful that we don't accidentally run into Richard Parker. And it's a subtle thing. Pi's reply to that, by the way, is, you won't, he's hiding away somewhere. But having said that, let's look at the rest of the question, which I think is really subtle and classically good. How do these lines reflect Mr. Okamoto's attitude towards Pi? And the answer there, well, I won't tell you. I'll give you, let me just say 10 seconds to work it out for yourself, assuming you've already got that far in the book. But once again, how do they reflect his attitude towards Pi? Well, here's the memo answer. Take a look and tell me what you think. So you see that Mr. Okamoto, for all his faults, is not actually a bad person. He certainly doesn't want to cause unnecessary offense or anything like that. Although he's also not shy to say that he doesn't believe pi the first time around. But anyway, there we go. So look at that. Despite his being skeptical, his attitude is sympathetic and benevolent. But the first time he was so exhausted, he didn't know what he was doing. Okay. There. Bear with me. This is the second last one. We're just about finished. And by then you'll all be experts, ultimate, consummate experts in answering contextual questions. Oh, there is pi's answer. I forgot it's the next question. There we go. Well, let's analyze this. You've got pi saying, don't worry, you won't find Richard Parker, in other words. He's hiding somewhere, you'll never find him. And then what does it say? Based on your knowledge of the novel as a whole. So now you've got to literally have read the book. Or at the very least, read most of the book and then done sort of summary. Discuss the significance of pi's statement. Sorry, discuss the significance. Wow, I'm really low on coffee at this stage. The significance of pi's statement. Okay, so once again, I'll give you just 5 seconds, 10 seconds. Think about that. What is the significance of this statement? Now here's the memo answer. And there we are. I would have written a completely different answer, just for the record. Because I'm still very much in favor of the animal version of the story. I don't think the human version was correct. I think he made that up just to appease the Japanese guys who wanted a story they could understand. But I don't think it ever was the real one. I think that the first story was the real one. Anyway, that's me. I'm an incurable romantic. Sorry about that in that regard. Let's go to our final one. And here, this is the one for 4 marks. And what is our instruction? Critically discuss. And when you are critically doing something, you are investigating the merits and the demerits of something. All right? And when you are discussing something, you are investigating by reasoning and logic. Okay. So let's take a look at the actual lines here. In line 26, pi agrees with Mr. Okamoto that believing in the better story is similar to believing in God. And yeah, I do agree. Critically discuss the validity of pi's belief in the context of the novel as a whole. Okay, so critically discuss, we've looked at that. The validity of pi's belief in the context of the novel as a whole. What belief? Belief in God. And, you know, when you look at the statistical probability of ignoring which one of these stories you believe, you've got somebody who was definitely and provably for 227 days in a lifeboat adrift on the Pacific. The chance of surviving that is statistically minuscule, so small that it's almost impossible to measure it. But the chances are that pi should have been dead. No wonder he had such a strong faith in God. And to some degree, that faith in God is what pulled him through. He just didn't believe it was his time to go yet. I mean, if you look at any one of us alive on the planet today, the fact that we don't all die as children is a miracle. That's one of the reasons why I'm a believer. But that's another story. So I can identify with this so well. Right, let me put up the memo answer, and now I can stop talking and start whistling rather. Much more fun for me to whistle. And there we are. There's the final part to that 4-mark question. It points out that an invalid response is very unlikely. Response, I should say, is very unlikely. But if we get them, we mark them appropriately. People, that was the 6th and final part of this series of lessons on answering contextual questions. This was aimed at, of course, the home language grade 12 students. I hope that this was beneficial to you all. And, well, hopefully when you approach your soon incoming exams, you'll be able to put these to good use. Otherwise, if you've only been watching this and you're approaching your prep exams or your final exams, great, it's still got time to be put to use. I'm going to say goodbye for now